Hello everyone, welcome to the Iowa Bandmasters Association Conference 2021. My name is Benjamin Coehlo and I teach bassoon at the University of Iowa School of Music. I'm glad to be here with you and to talk about bassoon and bassoon things. I very often get asked, who should play bassoon? Which student should be transferred from instrument, which instrument they should come from. The opinion that the bassoon, you can start as early as anyone else in the band, like fifth graders. If your band starts in fifth grade, I think if you can start bassoonists in fifth grade, I think it would be wonderful. With that, I tell you that my own story about starting learning the bassoon. I am originally from Brazil and come from a musical family, and the director of the conservatory was my father. And in Brazil, we did not have band or music courses during the regular school time. So we had a conservatory, so it was an after-school program, and that's where I learned the bassoon. And I wanted, at first, to play guitar. That's the instrument. I'm somewhat shy kind of a person, and playing the guitar, being by myself, hugging a guitar, felt something that I really wanted to do it. But as I said, my father was the director of a music conservatory, and I had older brothers that played the oboe, the oldest played the oboe, and then flute. And they said, no, you should play a band instrument or an orchestra instrument. And then at that time, I had two cousins playing the bassoon, learning the bassoon, older cousins, and I was 10 years old. So I got very excited, okay, I'll try the bassoon. And then I went to my very first bassoon lesson, and the bassoon professor at the school did not know I was the son of the director of the school, and he said, no, bassoon, you need to be 14 years old to start the bassoon. And I was very sad that he did not want to take me and teach me bassoon. I went back home. I was pretty sad. My dad got home from work, from the conservatory, and then I told him that the professor thought I was too young and too small. I was actually much shorter than the bassoon, the height of the bassoon. And he said, don't worry, I'll talk to the professor, go back next week, and he'll teach you. And I went back the following week, and then he told me, okay, well, let's try this, but first I need you to come to other people's lessons to see how it goes before I can hand the bassoon to you. And as I said earlier, I had two cousins that played the bassoon, so they let me play on their bassoons, which was really, really nice, so I had that contact with the bassoon. And then after a few weeks or a couple months, I started taking my bassoon lessons from the professor, which I have been doing since then for almost 50 years now. I'm playing the bassoon, and I'm glad I did, and I stuck with it. So I tell you this story because at first, the bassoon, from being such a big instrument, the overall length of the bassoon is about 8 feet long. So it's a daunting thing, it's a weird looking thing. It has this thing that we call the reed, that's always a nightmare for everybody. So I understand the difficulties that it is to start a young fifth grader on the bassoon. But I really encourage you to do that as soon as you can. And as I mentioned earlier, the other question I get asked is, if you're gonna get a kid from another instrument, which type of kid, which type of instrument they should transfer to the bassoon from. And I'm of the position that any kid, if the triangle player wants to play the bassoon, give him or her the bassoon. If the tuba player wants to play the bassoon, great. If the flute player wants to play the bassoon, fantastic. There's a lot of discussions about that. Besides physical stature, size, to play the bassoon, that you need to get those kids that are intelligent, and those kids that are not weirded out by playing something that is kind of funny looking. And I would like to demystify that, because I think If a kid wants to play the bassoon, give him or her the bassoon. I think the passion for the instrument and the desire of wanting to know and learn more about the instrument is the most important thing for anybody wanting to learn a musical instrument. Now, I'd like to show you the parts of the bassoon. Here we have a bassoon. In this case, that's very similar to the bassoon cases that you have in your school. And they happens to be a little bit heavy, but they do protect the instrument very, very well. Ta-da! I'll put it here. One thing that band students and school students is that they ask me and they tell me that that's complicated for them is when they have to play in band in between periods. So they don't have a lot of time to put the bassoon together, to get the bassoon or take it apart. So I ask the band directors to find a way to help the students, because the bassoon is a very expensive instrument and it's easy to break. And I'll show you each bassoon, each part of the bassoon, so you can have an idea of some places where it can be easy for a problem in terms of safety. First, I'll start here with this part of the bassoon that is called the boot joint. And the boot joint is the bottom part of the bassoon, and as you can see, has two holes where the other joints goes in there. And the bassoon has what we call the U-tube. So it's one continuous tube, which is over 8 feet long total, but there's a connection that of the two different bores of the bassoon, or it's one bore, but when you fold the bassoon, it's folded to this here. So this is the boot joint, and when a student is taking the bassoon out of the case to put it together, I recommend starting with the boot joint. The next joint is what we call the wing joint, or you can also be called the tenor joint. And it's called the wing joint because this part, this concave part of the bassoon, that this is actually what allows our fingers to be close together, because different in the other wind instruments, the bassoon holes, tone holes, are drilled perpendicular, not perpendicular to the bore, it's an angle. So the angle here gives the distance inside of the bore so you can produce the different notes. And thus, so to be ergonomic possible to play the bassoon, we have the tone holes in angles. So they use the 3 fingers in the left hand, they can be close together. Because this tone hole, for example, it goes out this direction. So the hole is actually here, and this first hole is going the opposite direction, so the tone hole is about here. Imagine the first finger here and the third finger. You do not be able to reach that distance, so thus they devise the wing. So then they can add these tone holes in a angle way, so then we can play the bassoon with the 3 fingers. So this is what we call the wing joint or the tenor joint. The next joint of the bassoon is what we call the bass joint or the long joint. Why you call the long joint? Because it is the longest joint that we have on the bassoon. And here is where the keys are for the very low notes of the bassoon. And here, of course, is the bell. And the bell, some bells have this plastic white thing on the top, this ring up here, and some bassoons have a metal ring, and there's no difference between the two, it's just cosmetic difference. And the next part of the bassoon is a very important part, and that is very fragile, which we call the bocal, the bassoon. And it's the angle so we can play in the proper position. I'll put this over here. And then we have another part of the bassoon, which is known as the hand rest, but I prefer to call this hand positioning device, HPD for short. And that goes in the boot joint to proper position the hand of the student. Of course, if your student has very small hand, he or she could play without this so they can reach the tone holes and the keys better. Going back to the wing joint, this is the traditional wing joint. But we also have bassoons, which have the plateau key on the third finger, which this will allow a younger kid, a smaller person, to be able to close this third hole, because this is one of the most problematic issues in playing the bassoon. I'll show a little bit later. When you're producing a sound, the angle how you hold the bassoon is very easy to have the third finger slide and the air will leak through the hole. And with the plateau key, it has a little ear, so the distance between the second and third finger is much smaller, and that will allow the student to close the key that has a pad and closes that hole to produce that note. Now we'll put the bassoon together. As I mentioned earlier, we get the boot joint, and you should hold down here very securely, not over the keys, because it will be difficult and could possibly bend the keys. So holding over here is a perfect position. And then we have the wing joint. And as you can see, the wing joint, close to the tenon, we have a connector over here. And that's very important because it's one area we can very easily we have an accident and break this connector. And when we put in the bassoon together, we need to be very aware of the stem here when you put in the bassoon together. And as I mentioned earlier, the wing joint is concave, and that should be parallel, that concave, to the bigger tone hole, the bigger bore of the bassoon. And then we can have the long joint or bass joint. So look at the way I'm putting the bassoon together. For a younger kid, this may be a problem. So it's advisable that the student does this sitting, so it's steady on the floor, and then they can put the long joint and align the keys here very carefully and press to close the two joints together. Some bassoons, and usually school bassoons, have what we call the body lock. And that's very important to use it because it helps protect the bassoon. Because without a body lock, we can have a problem with the joints can be wiggly, and then the tenon could break. Then we have the bell. And the bell has the B flat key over here, and that connects to the long joint. So you should hold the bell, holding the key down, so the key is on the bottom here is open, so you can easily connect to the bassoon and make a perfect alignment with the long joint. And the next part is the bocal. And the bocal is a very fragile piece of metal and very easy to break, to bend, and sometimes the solder can become open. So the student should always hold the bocal in this part close to the pin of the whisper key to put it on and off on the bassoon. So like that. So you can align for the key over here. And the next part is the hand positioning device or hand rest. Now, holding the bassoon in position, there are several ways to do it, and I highly recommend using a seat strap because the majority of the weight of the bassoon will be on the seat strap. And there's different kinds of seat straps, and I recommend the one that has the cup, where the bottom of the boot joint can be inserted here, just like that. So it's better to always put the seat strap on the chair first, sit down, and attach the bassoon to the seat strap. As I mentioned, the seat strap is the best thing to hold the bassoon in place, like this, because most of the weight of the bassoon is on the seat strap. But also, most bassoons also comes with a neck strap, which is very similar to this. And I really do not recommend the usage of neck strap to hold the bassoon, because the bassoon is heavy and that weight on the neck can be detrimental to the student in terms of posture and holding the bassoon, and affects intonation and tone quality. Although I do recommend the combination of the two is very, very advisable. I use both because it helps hold the instrument in place for better posture. So especially if the bassoon has what we call the balance hanger. Usually school bassoons do not have a balance hanger, but this is helpful. And it's also helpful when the student gets up to walk around or to go from places or to move. So that's very, very important to have something that helps secure the instrument in place with security. But if you're willing to get something else than the neck strap, I recommend the harness. Then there's several types of harness in the market, and this one is one of the cheapest ones. And any store that sells accessories for music instruments will know about this harness and the different kind of harness. So this you put over here, and you can control the height with this over here. And that's distributes the weight of the bassoon in the shoulder and not on the neck, which I think is very, very important for the student to be very careful and be comfortable in good posture to be able to play the bassoon. I often get asked how a student should carry the instrument. And you see what I did. When I went to pick it up from the stand, I very quickly hold the bassoon with both hands in both joints, and my right hand went right to the boot joint, so to have a firm security to hold the instrument. So, and the boco is always in the way. These things is very dangerous, right? So they can poke themselves, or as I said, they also can very easily break. So I see very often students that have the boco here for transport. And that's a big problem, because the edge of the tip of the boco is very sharp. And every time you put over here in the wing joint, you can damage inside of the wing joint. I recommend better to put it over here. The only problem with over here is much more wiggly around, so you also have to be very careful. But I think out of the two possibilities, this is a better possibility. Now, holding the bassoon. Secure both hands. Seat strap. Make sure that the student sits with his or her thigh over the side of the chair. Very often I see this, and that will damage the bassoon, the boot joint, by hitting the chair. So by sitting with your thighs over, so the bassoon then touches the student's thigh instead of the chair. And as I mentioned, I think having the harness together with the seat strap is very, very important. Another thing that is very often I get asked, my student is having a very hard time playing low notes. Very often is that the whisper key is not closing the pin of the buckle when you play the below E, the low E and below that, because when you touch the low E key, as through the connector, it goes over here and depress the whisper key. And if that, let me just put it over here, is not closing like this one, it's totally open, it will be very hard for the student to play below low E. And the lowest note of the bassoon will have a very hard time to come out. So the bassoons are made that the low E key is, this connector over here has an elevation that you need to line that up perfectly. So then when you press just the low E key, the whisper key closes perfectly. And that will allow the student to play the low notes more easily. So the best way I see for the students is to be very careful with the way they sit. You know, they should sit upright with both feet planted on the ground. See, one of the other reasons I recommend the seat strap plus the harness, because it alleviates the weight of the bassoon in the left arm of the player. And now let's talk about the height of the bassoon in relation to the body of the student. You know, you should sit very clearly with the 2 feet planted on the ground for stability. And this instrument should be brought to the player, and it should, the reed be touching just the lower lip slightly, so the player can move forward just slightly, so it gets into the mouth, not directly straight, but a little bit of an angle. For another very important aspect of holding the bassoon and playing the bassoon is how we should have the hands around the bassoon. I advise the student to have the hands down to the side, and that has the natural curvature of the hands. And when it comes to the bassoon, the curvature should stay as natural as possible. Especially in the right hand, that's much easier to obtain. The left hand, because there's some weight of the bassoon on that hand, we have to be very careful where in the hand the bassoon rests. I like that the bassoon rests between the 2 knuckles, not on the top of the knuckle back here, because it would be very difficult to move the fingers. So in between the 2 knuckles, then you can play with the first finger moving from that second joint. But again, keeping the hand as natural as possible. And of course, a very important part of holding the bassoon is what we call the whisper key, where the thumb should be there. One point of interest is that the whisper key is just the same as the register key in the other woodwind instruments. So the difference here is that the bassoon, the register key is naturally open. On the saxophone, on the clarinet, on the flute, the register keys are normally closed. And one of the reasons for that on the bassoon being the opposite is to give stability on the holding the instrument. If the register key needs to be closed and a key needs to be depressed, that gives the stability of the thumb holding the bassoon against the fingers in the front here, so it gives stability. So if the whisper key was naturally closed, then the left thumb would be wavering and the bassoon would be very unstable. So the whisper key being naturally open requires that the student have that key down, being held by the left thumb. Okay, now let's talk about the embouchure. That also is a thing that I see very often when I work with younger players, that how they use their lips and in the reed, because the bassoon's embouchure really should be very free. Is opposite than the oboe, where the lips are much firmer to play the oboe. So the easiest way I find to give the concept of an embouchure is the straw. So a straw, just a regular straw that the student will put in the mouth and make them think that they are like drinking some delicious natural juice, not soda pop. And then they can hug the straw with the lips. The difference to play the bassoon, that we need to strengthen the corners of the mouth. This musculature needs to be firmer, not here in the center. So try to get the bassoons to have a dimple when they're forming the embouchure. Another way to do this is to use the bocal, which is pretty much the same thing as a straw. So when they get the reed, they can do the same thing. That concept of hugging the reed and making a very round embouchure, the muscles around the reed. And that's usually what I do in the first lesson of a student. I start them with just the reed. First, I just give the reed for them just to make beautiful sounds that a reed can make. I let them play. So they have the sensation of the vibrations on the lips without any worries, just blowing air and the reed, so which should be fun. So the air support, that's the most important thing in playing a windy instrument, and actually playing any instrument. The breathing cycle and how one breathes affects how one performs, even if it's a piano or a string instrument. But of course, for us wind players, that controlling that is essential. So the form to breathe for the bassoon is the same breath techniques for any other wind instrument or brass instrument, the tuba, the trumpet. Is the same idea. Breathing air from the bottom up. Make sure that you use your abdominal muscles, and I always tell the students to go breathe in, and then you just go just doing that. That the musculature, the abdominal intercostal musculature automatically engages the proper form without having to worry about too much stress. By just that's the proper way to support the sound. And after they play around with the reed and understand this breathing, breathe out, breathe in, and then that everything is engaged. And then using the bocal only, you can think about the straw, put the reed on, and do that. And a few minutes of practicing that helps a lot when you put the bocal into the instrument and to play a note. And I'll demonstrate that now. In this case, since I have the harness, I'll put the harness first. I hook the harness first, then this seat strap, and I do the same thing with I just did the bocal. And the best note to start a bassoon is on the note C. And the note C is left hand finger 1, 2, 3, plus the whisper key. And let the right hand kind of hover on top of the holes and the keys on the boot joint over here. And then and that's the note C. And the note D is just lifting that third finger. You get a D. And so forth all the way to all open, which is F. C, D, E, F. Always with the whisper key holding down for stability of the instrument. And those 4 notes is part of the C major scale or part of the F major scale. First tetrachord of C major or the second tetrachord of the F major. So, and to study that and develop the technique of C, D, E, F, I recommend to practice a lot of these 3-4 note groupings, as this, for example. And also, always teach the student to sing through the instrument instead of just playing the notes. Like, if you ask the student to sing, they will not sing like that. They'll sing with a beautiful singing voice, especially that a youngster person has a beautiful voice singing. So they can use the air to sing and go. And they can start making music even though they're playing just 4 simple notes as part of a scale. Then I would add the right hand. And that's a little bit of a difference. It's not just the first finger, because just the first finger on the right hand is a B natural. Since I want to start with the F major as a scale, as we just learned the second tetrachord of the F major scale, I start with the B flat, which is fingers 1, 2, plus the B flat key. And that lifting the thumb from the B flat, you get the A, and then you have the G, and then the F. So then B flat. And the same process that we do from the C, D, E, F, we do the process for the right hand, but we start with the B flat and then down the scale. Or so then you have the first 4 notes of the F major scale, the first tetrachord, and then the next thing I teach is the connection between the 2 hands, which in this case will be between the notes B flat and C natural. And then once that understood the movement of these 3 fingers on the right hand to go from B flat to C, you can proceed in going to the F major scale. Now it's time to put the bassoon away. And we just do this, the reverse order then when we put the bassoon together. And we have to be very careful again with the parts, especially if they're very sensitive. The tendons can be easily, if it bent it too much, they can easily break. So we take the seat strap out, and it's good to keep the harness if you have one, so you can stand and have a security holding the bassoon, and you take the reed off, and you should blow all the moisture out, and you should dry the reed before putting it back into the reed case and make sure it's dry. And if they have time, which I hope they do have enough time to put the instrument away in a very organized manner, they should put the reed up to dry on the table before completely putting inside of the box or the reed case, so then the reed can dry a little bit more. And we'll talk more about the reed in a little bit. So then you should take the bocal. Again, we should be very careful where we hold the bocal. It should not ever be held here. Again, because I mentioned earlier that could crack the bocal. So you need to get here. And one other very big problem is when the students or even professionals, that happens to me before, where you can do this and the whisper key is engaged, and then when you turn the bocal, you rip the pad off, or worse, okay, the little pinhole of the bocal can easily break. It's solder in there, it's soft solder, and it can easily break, which then will take more time and money to get fixed. So I recommend holding the bocal like this and put it out, and then blow out the excess water that's accumulated there. Let's just call it water, so we don't have to worry about other terms for this. The water that's condensated in there, you can shake and put it back into the case. Then you take the bell off. So here I recommend taking the bassoon down, put it on the floor, holding over here in the top of the long joint and pushing this key down. Again, the left hand or the right hand, depending which order you put your hand, and hold the B flat key down, and then just turn slightly back and forth to take it off. Put it in the case. Then take the long joint, holding into the boot joint like this, where there's not a lot of keys to hold in the way. So don't careful to put a hand over here, because you may hurt your hand or bend the key. And holding up here, turn. And the wing joint is next. But before you put the wing joint in there, I recommend having a piece of cloth to go in between the two joints over here, the long joint and the wing joint, because you don't want that wood against wood rubbing against each other when it's storage. And then you take it apart, and then hopefully the student played enough where there's water accumulation down here, and we should always, since there's the bore, well, the bigger bore and the smaller bore of every bassoon has a rubber insert that protects from rotting, the woods from getting rotted because of the contact with water. So you should hold it like this and turn it like this, so the water comes off from the smaller bore. This can be here for now. And then you have the wing joint, and it's imperative that the bassoon is swabbed every single time of usage, because the thing that can be the most damaging for wooden bassoons is the water, because the bassoon is made out of maple, and maple is somewhat soft wood, and getting in contact with the humidity will rot the wood. Even though the wood is treated, it still can happen with the year after year of wood rot, and I see that a lot on all kinds of bassoons that we should try to prevent from happening. And the best way is to really clean the bassoon after each usage. I recommend using swabs, one for the wing joint and one for the boot joint. These are microfibrous swabs that I'll show you in a minute. But also it's very common, people use swabs like this that are made out of cotton. I really don't recommend cotton because it accumulates much more dust that can be brought inside of the instrument. Other swabs is the one swab that is made out of silk. for both joints. I also do not recommend one swab simply because when you dry the wing joint, the swab will get wet. And then when you go swab the boot joint, you're bringing water into the part of the bassoon, into the board bassoon, which does not have the rubber insert. So 2 swabs is best. So let me put this back in the case, and this will not be used. So here is the swab for the wing joint, made of microfiber. And this is very important. At the end, there's a string at the end, because it very often can happen that this can have a knot. That way, the student might not see that, and when you put through, the swab will get stuck inside the wing joint, and to take it out is a little bit more laboring, and you need a special tool. And please do never just try to pull out the same way it went in. We need to pull the swab back out from the bottom end. So let me just put it here to demonstrate. Here. If there's a knot, it will get stuck in here, so never try to get it out by pushing hard this way. And you should tell your students never to do that. And that's why it's very important to have this string out here, so we can, if it gets stuck in there, we can pull back throughout where it's bigger. The diameter here is bigger of the bore. So, but you should put this through. And I usually recommend to do this twice. And should do it slowly, not like fast like this, because you're not allowing the cloth to absorb the humidity from the inside of the bore. So please do it this way and pull. Even could wait a second. Of course, the students are in a hurry, for the next activity. So I know that may be too much to ask, but we should at least try to have that. And then we can put this. And I recommend, when putting the swab away, to fold the swab, open like this, because it will prevent from creating any knots into the cloth here. Put away. Now is the time for the long joint, and then we have the special boot joint, boot joint, the long, thicker swab, because the bore in that part of the bassoon is much larger than the wing joint. And of course, you take the hand positioning device, or hand rest. And then again, here, the 2 bores, the larger bore and the smaller bore, you should drop the ball here of the swab into the larger bore, and then turn around. Let's see if it goes. There you go. And then you pull, and you wait a few seconds in there, and then you can slowly pull back. Pull out, sorry. English is not my native language. And I recommend to do it twice. Again, the student should be look very carefully that there's not a knot on the swab. And here we go. Oops, this way. And again, doing the same thing to get the swab. This will allow the swab to dry more evenly and keep the cloth without any possible knots. Now we're going to talk a little bit about reeds. As you know, the reed is probably the most important part of the success of a bassoon playing. Without a reed that makes a good sound, that plays in tune, it's very difficult for the student to succeed. So here I have some very basic reed tools to talk to you about and go over each one of them, which, reed equipment is very, very expensive to buy the whole professional kit of reed repair and reed adjustments. But with very simple tools, you can help your student very, very well. First, I'm going to talk about the reed cases. As I mentioned before, here's a reed case, and this reed case has the pegs in the end that really helps support the reed and stay without banging against each other inside of the reed case. And of course, also we have the single reed that usually when you buy a reed, it comes in a plastic tube like this. And as I also mentioned before, make sure you put some holes into this plastic for the aeration of the reed when it's wet after playing, so it will last a lot longer, the reed. So I would recommend for students to have 3 playing reeds every single time and rotate them. We shouldn't use one reed for the duration of the lifespan of that one reed, because it will be shorter if you have 3 reeds in working condition and you rotate them daily. You're gonna have reeds in playable condition for much, much longer. So I highly recommend that. And here I have just a little jelly pot that I used for water, So every time you're gonna do any kind of work on the reed, you need to make sure that the reed is wet, because the cane reed, when it's dry, is very easy to break or crack. And so I'll get there to a minute. First, now let's move on here now to the basic tools. Here I have like a X-Acto knife, but it's a knife that has the rounded blade. That is very helpful when you're trimming the reed, but the knife is not necessary to make reed adjustments. Other things that are much safer to use to make adjustment are files, such as this type of files. I like the diamond-coated files because they work more like sandpaper than like a regular type of file. Also, this is just a piece of 400 grit sandpaper, and that's basically all you need to fix a reed or to adjust a reed. Here we have what's called the Bassoon plaque, and this is very important to have when you're making adjustments on the reed, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But if you don't have one, you for sure might have a guitar pick that works almost as well as the regular bassoon plaque. I prefer the plaques that are plastic versus the plaques that are metal, because it's much easier, much cheaper to buy, and much easier to replace. So when we get a reed, I'll get this one here because that's a reed that has a problem that very often encounter when you buy reeds. Like, I don't know if you can see here, this reed is very open at the tip. Very, very open. That's too open. The opening should be like not larger than 1/16 of an inch. So this is quite a bit more than that. Then we have a reed here that is a little bit too closed, and we'll talk to you about how to do that, to fix that. So we'll start with these 2 reeds. I'll soak both reeds. Oh, and I forgot to mention a pair of pliers. Any small plier can work, and I'm sure you have these laying around somewhere for fixing all the instruments that you have to fix every day. And this is a bassoon mandrel. That's a special mandrel mostly for making reeds, but also can be used to help hold the reed while you're doing adjustments on the reed. But you can also find a nail that can serve the same purpose. I myself do not use a mandrel when I'm scraping reeds or fixing reeds. I just hold it in my hands without any extra mandrel here. So now this reed is soaked. All you have to do is soak for 1 minute to 2 minutes, not longer than that. Some people recommend to soak the reed for 5 minutes. I think it's too long of a time for the reed. The more humidity the cane has, the less life it will have. So this reed, for example, I'm going to try to play, just blow through the reed. It's really hard to get a sound out because it's very open. So what to do first? You can just use your hands and grab the reed, the front, sideways like this, and squeeze. And when the reed is wet, you can even turn a little bit like this, up and down. And squeeze the blade together when the reed is too open. So now the reed is at the proper opening without any adjustments, without using the pliers, just your hands. You can do that very easily. And now see what kind of sound we get. So the reed vibrates much, much more easily. That's one of the first things you should do to help the student if the reed is having problems, is to look at the opening of the reed. This reed, let's put this one here, that I said that was too closed, it's the same thing. You do the opposite. Instead of squeezing here to close, you squeeze on the sideways, because when the reed, okay, now let's go back here. It's very close. It sounds like it's hard to get the sound out. But actually, the reed is too soft because it's too closed. So any air pressure or embouchure pressure actually makes the blades collapse. And then no air goes through between the two blades, so then there's no sound. So to fix that and make the proper opening, you can grab on the reed by what we call the shoulder of the reed, and then just carefully open up, compressing this way, so you see the reed tip open. And then, and the reed is blowing and vibrating very, very easily. So, but let's say that the reed is still too hard. So one easy thing to do is to let me get this reed, and let's pretend that this reed is too hard. So I put the plaque on the reed, and that's essential. I really believe having the plaque is very important, because when you work on the blades separate, you need this protection that the force that you're going to put on the top of the blade is not actually putting pressure on the lower blade. So the plaque helps with that. So if the reed is overall too hard, just getting the sandpaper, you can overall scrape the reed to the entire blade. And you start with the sandpaper because you can more evenly sand the blades evenly, and I think that will help. And then you try again. If it continues to be too hard, then I recommend you use a file. Either this file that's a little bit wider, or this that is narrower. This is a triangle file. Thank you very much for your time, and a special thank you to the IBA for inviting me to make this presentation for you. At the University of Iowa, on the bottom of the screen here, you can see my email and phone number, and I'm more than happy to provide any information or any help you might need with your bassoons. I'm here to help. And please watch out for the handout that comes with this video. I hope to see all of you sometime in some kind of concert, live concerts with full audience participation. This has been a difficult year for all of us, but we're survivors, we're here, and we're ready to start making music again. Thank you very much.